Good evening and welcome to the latest event in our Liverpool Leaders series, where we get to interview alumni from the University of Liverpool who've gone on to lead in their field. And I'm delighted that today is the turn of Dame Anne Lim. Dame Anne has a varied and suitably high-flying career since graduating from the University of Liverpool with a BA Honours in French in 1975, and we're thrilled that she's joining us today to share her story. This is the 8th event in our Liverpool Leaders series, and we're going to post a link to past events in the chat. So if you want to watch again, you can absolutely do that anytime. We're always looking for ways to develop our alumni offer and what we put on for you. So if you have any feedback following the event, we're going to be sending out a survey. Please do let us know what you think of what we're doing, and if there's anything else that you would like to see from the Alumni Association. So let me take a moment to introduce today's speaker. Dame Anne Lim is an educationalist, a philanthropist, a business leader and a charity entrepreneur. Mancunian by birth, Dame Anne is now very firmly rooted in Milton Keynes, her adopted hometown, having been based there since 1986. She's a Deputy Lieutenant for Buckinghamshire and indeed is currently serving as its 789th High Sheriff, notably the first Quaker to ever hold that role. After a 25-year career in further education as a lecturer and then as a college principal in Milton Keynes and Cambridge, Dame Anne was responsible at a senior civil servant level for the UK government's flagship digital learning initiative, LearnDirect, and the National e-Services programmes DirectGov and UK Online. Moving into the private sector in 2005, Anne worked as a government advisor in the UK and overseas. She led in the Departments for Education and Business Innovation and Skills on setting up the online learning service UnionLearn. Dame Anne has held a number of public and private sector non-exec directorships, including a ministerial appointment for Homes England, chair of the Milton Keynes Partnership, a successor body to the Milton Keynes Development Corporation, chair of Entrust, the national regulator of the government's environmental tax credit scheme, the Landfill Communities Fund. Dame Anne was a member of the South East Council for the Arts Council England, and since 2010 she's been chair of IF, the biennial Milton Keynes International Festival. Dame Anne is currently chair of the City of Guilds of London Institute and was, until 2021, chair of the Scout Association, the UK's largest youth engagement and volunteering charity, and she was the first woman and the first openly gay person to serve in that role. In the 2011 Queen's Birthday Honours List, Dame Anne was appointed OBE for Public Service and Services to Education. In 2015, the Queen's Birthday Honours List, she was awarded a CBE for Public and Political Services, and in 2022, she received a damehood for her services to young people and philanthropy. And that's just the highlights from a long and very distinguished career. So, Dame Anne, thank you so much for being with us today. It's the usual format, people, so if you have questions for Dame Anne, please put them into the Q&A box. We're going to get to your questions really in about 25 minutes or so. I'm just going to throw some questions over to Anne first to get us started. We both grew up quite close to each other in Manchester, just down the road, in fact. So I'm really interested to understand a little bit about the impact of your journey pre the University of Liverpool. What was your childhood like, and what led you to make the very excellent decision to come to the University of Liverpool to study?
Well, thank you, Susie, and good afternoon, everyone. And sorry, I'm having to join from my iPhone rather than my iPad, but I hope you can see and hear me nonetheless. I find it terribly embarrassing, really, to listen to introductions like that. But let's put it down to Liverpool University then. That must have given me a great start, and I am grateful for that. But prior to that, to answer your question, Susie, I was born in Moss Side in 1953, and therefore I'm completely the product of an education system that gave me the kind of opportunities, and many others in the post-war years, the kind of opportunities to go to university, because I was able to take an 11 plus. I passed and went to a grammar school, and I, because of that, was able to apply to do French at Liverpool, as you say. And that kind of opportunity, the opportunity to go to university without incurring any debt from the poor circumstances, relatively poor circumstances into which I'd been born on Great Western Street in Moss Side, is really a hallmark of the baby boomers, isn't it? I chose to go to Liverpool, I think, because of this reason and this reason alone. All the tuition was in the medium of French. There was a professor of French there called Claude Meyer, legendary, and he abhorred the Oxbridge system, where you were taught French in English and then read the books in French, but didn't actually use the language. And I have to say, in the 70s, 71 to 75, when I was there, learning French in that way from A level, which is almost unimaginable now, isn't it, in terms of modern languages? So that in itself was quite a journey, to go from Moss Side, to have learnt French through a grammar school, and to take that forward into university, to be a French teacher. That was what my ambition was. If that had been my obituary, I'd have been very happy.
So I want to ask, what changed? Why not a French teacher? But instead, I'll sort of say, what do you think? What do you think your time at Liverpool gave you in terms of the leadership journey that you've had? Any qualities that you picked up during your time with us?
I think I'd be lying, actually, if I said that I could identify that there was anything in my student time at Liverpool that led to me being a leader. That might be the case for somebody of a different generation, because I think these days one of the benefits of being at university, in where we have a much more diverse population, including very many more international students, and where the curriculum and the student experience is very much more to the forefront, then the idea of social mobility and coaching and mentoring and leading and being inspired by others. I suppose there was probably the point that I've made, which was that we had excellent teachers, and we had, I was part of the choral society. We had a wonderful professor called Basil Smallman, who conducted the orchestra and the choir. So I suppose in leadership terms, I saw people doing things that they were passionate about. The Italian teacher, Lucrezia Zaina, she was in my hall of residence and looked after us. I saw people who really cared about their subject. And in that sense, if I can conclude with this, I've always done what I love. And one of the things I say is, I do what I love, and therefore I love what I do. And I suppose that passion for doing the things that you're interested in makes you a good leader, really, because you're not having to lead things that you don't really want to do. And I suspect those teachers at Liverpool did that.
Brilliant. So can you tell me a bit about your career immediately after graduation? You did go into education, didn't you?
I did, and I didn't go very far from Liverpool, really, or from Manchester, where I was born. My first job was teaching French in a further education college in the centre of Manchester. Well, Wythenshawe, first of all, and then St John's College in Manchester. So I went teaching French and English as a foreign language in Manchester. I then moved quite quickly, not by choice, but because I kind of had got into a system, to become a teacher, a lecturer of French in the more applied vocational sector. So French for tourism, French for business, French for catering. And I moved up into the Peak District in Buxton, became a head of department of languages and business there. And then from 80 to 86, I was in Derbyshire, actually during the time of the miners' strike. That was hugely insightful and informed my career choices, actually, subsequently, because I got very involved in ensuring that women who had not worked up until that point, because then the men worked and were out in the mines, and suddenly the men were on strike, and somebody had to help out. We did some courses on women in technology and women into management, to get and women into small businesses, so I went into further education, and that's why in 1986, I suddenly sort of shot up the career ladder and became a vice principal of Milton Keynes College. And a year later, I was at age 34 principal of Milton Keynes College, and had firmly left the French teaching behind, but had picked up a career in leadership.
Fantastic. A lot of the people who dial into these calls are perhaps at the start of their career and looking for a little bit of advice from people who've been around the block a little bit longer. And if you could give 3 pieces of advice to today's audience on to manage your career, what would they be?
Well, I've partly given one of those already, which is just to follow what's in your heart and what your passion is and what you really care about. You don't necessarily have to love it, but I think that you have to think about the days when you don't want to study, when you don't want to get up to go to work, when you don't want to confront somebody difficult at work, when you don't think you can get a job that other people are saying you'd be good at, but you're worried whether you'll let yourself down. All the bad times that you have in life, I think can be redeemed a little bit if you're very sure that what you're getting out of bed for in the morning is something you really enjoy doing, and where you're skilled at it, and you can become more skilled, or where you can learn a new skill. I think the second thing I'd say, and I didn't have this really, I had these role models, I think, that I've mentioned a little bit more unconsciously, but this idea of having some career advice, having some coaching, having some mentoring, thinking through and planning your career rather than letting it happen entirely opportunistically, is very much more in vogue and very much more needed today. And I would say definitely take advantage of that, explore possibilities, talk to people in jobs that you think you might like to do, and don't stay in a job that you don't like doing, because it just won't work for you. So it might sound terribly simplistic, but yes, I think the emphasis on learning from others who've been in the kind of job you want to do, and getting guidance from them through having a mentor, and choosing inspirational people. Don't be afraid to say. I work with somebody now at City and Guilds, as it happens, and she said, "Oh, I heard Tony Hall speak," and I just went up to him and said, "Would he coach me?" I mean, he was involved in the BBC, Director General of the BBC, did lots of other things, and he said yes. And so, I mean, she's had, I think a lot of people who, again, perhaps just of my generation, who, if we haven't had necessarily coaches and support as mentors. Some people have, but it's not been routine and established. If they're asked to support another, they can only say no, really. And I suppose the third thing is much more to do with tapping into your own audacity and creativity, and if you think about the things that limit you, and then just say, no, I'm not going to let that limit me. Don't be afraid to be told no. Think the outrageous, and just push yourself a little bit more than perhaps you might think you're able to achieve, because in the failure to achieve that, you will learn something as well. There's, as we know, so much to be learned from the mistakes we make as from our successes. Does that make sense? Have I given you 3 things there?
You have given me 3 wonderful things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And sorry, somebody came in with a cup of tea for me, which is terribly nice.
It's very informal. You have your cup of tea.
It's okay for the moment. But...
brilliant. I mean, this question probably builds on your previous answer in many ways, but I'm interested in what you were saying about women in the mining communities and just your work in terms of encouraging women into work. And I know, as you say, that's been a passion of yours. And you were appointed the first ever female chair of the Scouts Association. You're actively involved in the Women's Leadership Network. Did you face any issues when you took over the Scouts, being the first woman in the role? And what challenges do you think that women in leadership roles still face? And have you got any advice that you could offer to aspiring women leaders?
Well, there are two things there, Susie. One, no, I didn't encounter any difficulty or issue or prejudice or misogyny or homophobia or discrimination or anything when I became chair of the Scouts. And if you can be bothered to Google my name alongside Emma Barnett, she who is now just other Mancunian, although went to Manchester University, so we won't mention her in as a Liverpool alumni, but now in the seat at Women's Hour. But in October 2016, when I took on the role of chair of the Scouts, I did an interview with she was training for the job then, and the job she then got, that I think it's a very interesting interview to listen to, just because of her style and the way I answered the questions that she put to me. But absolutely no issue. It was the fact that I was a woman and the fact that I was gay was not even it didn't even cross my mind. It was nice to be the first woman, but I went to the Scouts because brownies and guides had profoundly influenced me and helped me as a young person growing up. And I totally believe in informal learning and what working with young people can do in the way that the Scouts and indeed the guides do it. So that's the first thing. However, having been very Pollyanna-ish about that, I was also very truthful about that. No issue whatsoever at Scouts. To this day, I am still receiving, I cannot believe it, at 70 and in 2023. But I'm still subject to misogynistic and homophobic abuse. And I can't imagine I'd like to imagine a world where that was no longer possible, but of course it still needs to be worked at. So it is intrinsic in the workplace, and obviously this applies to race, it applies to neurodiversity, it applies to anybody who is in any way perceived to be different. I mean, different from what? I do not know. Yeah, I had lots of overt and covert underminings, and they continue to this day. And I'm not the only one. I happened to, on Monday this week, listen to a really excellent presentation by Theresa May. I know she's plugging a new book at the moment, which which I think perhaps even covers some of these things. But there's probably not a woman in the workplace that hasn't encountered at some stage something that really if they define as a woman, their identity shouldn't be a part of the equation. How do you deal with it? Well, it's no good making people feel bad, or well, some people would say take it on and smash it. I don't say that, because I don't find that making people feel bad or little or ashamed about themselves actually helps solve the problem. But I think there's a way of taking it on, depending on what might have happened, for you to feel that somebody is discriminating against you. There's perhaps a way of I'm not saying avoid it, of tackling it with someone if they use inappropriate language or they make you feel not valued. There's probably a way of having a conversation which says, can we talk about this? I don't feel it's appropriate that you've addressed me in this way, and this is why, and just try and engage in some kind of discussion about why an incident or a piece of an email was written in a certain way or language was used. I think that's all you can do to try and depersonalize it and focus on the issue and help people understand. The vast majority of people won't engage in that way. So I know it's another example of me being a Pollyanna, but I think one or two will. And I'm taking on the might of the Athenaeum Club at the moment. You can Google it in the Times of June the 3rd or whatever it was. Bunch of academics there, some of them Liverpool academics. Well, sorry, I don't mean Liverpool academics, including the former Vice Chancellor of Liverpool, Janet, who's a member of the Athenaeum Club in London. I just mean academics in general, and a whole host of other people, white men, who feel their world is very threatened at the moment. We have to deal with that, don't we?
I was listening to some of those interviews with Theresa May, and I think it was her chief of staff who was saying, because she'd come in when she'd made the resignation speech, where she'd teared up a little bit, and she was frustrated with herself. And the chief of staff said, "No, it's fine. We've been always telling you to show more of your softer side." And she said, "But you do not understand the criticism that I will now get for that." And indeed, she did. Because it's that sense that if you show emotion as a woman, you're weak, and then probably don't have that same label thrown at them. So yeah, I've been listening to some of that with interest this week. You were recently appointed a Dame. Congratulations. Well, last year,
Thank you.
I think.
Yes, last summer. I'm just going to reach for the tea now.
Oh yeah, please do.
Carry on. Yeah.
That's obviously an honour that not many of us would get to experience in our lifetimes. So happy times. Can you talk us through what happens on the day? How did that go?
Well, actually, I haven't got the bling yet because I've not been able to go to an investiture. Simply because when I was invited to it, I was away skiing, and such are my priorities these days that to still be skiing at 70 is far more important than going and getting a bit of dangly stuff that I'll not necessarily wear very often. But the day for me was actually when I got the letter, which I wasn't expecting in any way, and I interestingly. I arrived home and I had 2 days where I'm speaking to you from now, which is the headquarters of the Princess Foundation, Dumfries House in New Cumnock in Ayrshire in Scotland. And I'd had 2 days up here working with the charity and working with the students that we support and with some of the supporters. I that morning before I came back down south, it's a very beautiful place here, and I sat there in the morning, and I just found the words. I thank God for whether you believe in God or not, for everything and everybody in my life. I felt immensely grateful, really. And that sort of stayed with me. And 6-7 hours later, I got home in Milton Keynes, and Maggie, my wife, said there was, obviously an official looking letter there. And we opened it. She hadn't opened it, and we opened it together, and we saw that it obviously said Dame. And actually, my reaction was that feeling of gratitude for having been recognised for all the things that you have said, but it was more a gratitude that I'm here and that I've done something with my life. And I didn't whoop for joy and think, "Aren't I wonderful?" Actually, it was Maggie who was really more moved than I was, if I can say it like that. And she just said, "Well, I'm just so proud of you. It's so lovely," and it meant a lot to her. And then eventually, you obviously have to keep it quiet. But then eventually, when the news came out, I told my niece and my nephew, and they are 31 and or they were at the time 31 and 29, and They don't really know what the honours system is. It doesn't motivate them in any way, and you kind of don't know at that age, really. Even when I got the OBE, my niece rather acerbically, no, yeah, that's she wasn't the one that said other buggers' efforts or something. It wasn't your thing. She gave what did she say about the CBE? Oh, it'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, for them, it's not a big deal. But my nephew then Googled it, Dame, and he just said, "Oh God, Manjo, this is big. This is big." Anyway, they are both going to come with me when I get the bling. So I think they are rather tickled by the fact that it's like Dame Judi Dench, I mean, because everybody knows her as a dame, that you can use the same title if you want. And I do, and other people value it, I have to say.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, I hope it's a wonderful day when it comes. Do you know when you're going to go and have your
Yes, I've got
initial?
another date now. Yes, so I have. I've got another date.
Good. You mentioned some of it there about that, obviously you do a huge amount for charity, and that's one of the reasons that you indeed have been honoured with your damehood. Um, how important is that idea of service to you? I know that you are a committed Quaker and a person of great faith. Can you sort of tell us how that has shaped your idea of service?
Well, I mean, it's not come from my parents. My father had to make his way in life. He was a butcher in Great Western Street in Manchester. He was disabled. He'd not had an education. Didn't stop him being a Tory and a crook. Well, not quite a crook, but I mean, he would have never given money away because I suppose it was so hard to make money just to make a life for yourself. And he really believed in kind of Thatcherite self-made people. Not that he did kind of make a lot, but the idea of public service was not in his experience or in my grandparents' experience, or really in any of my family's experience. Nor was it in my mother's, although she was very different from my father. She was more educated. She more came from trade. They were publicans. Her grandfather was an economic migrant from Germany who'd come with nothing and risen to be the head waiter at the Midland Hotel in Manchester. And it's quite nice to go back to their archive and see that Louis Wiest, naturalised in 1901, is in there. And so her father, as a result of that, was able to give her a bit of a better education, but she couldn't go to university because she went into the ATS in the war. And that was her way of broadening her life. But her life of service was to a family, really. She had 2 kids, and actually she had to look after, in many ways, a father who, as I say, was undaunted, but actually quite disabled and had epilepsy as well, and still lived to 91. But there we go. I think the answer to your question is twofold. One, it came from what I've spoken about, which is the time I happen to have been born into, and the opportunities that the state gave me, means that public service for me is something I'm very proud to have benefited from, and therefore want to give back to. And it wasn't just the fact that being a French teacher was the pinnacle of a career aspiration for a young girl in the 50s. It was that public service was a good thing to go into. I'm not saying making money isn't a good thing to go into at all. I think entrepreneurism is great, and we need money and prosperity. But the idea of giving service, I think, came from those teachers and the public servants I've worked with and had a career with. In terms of charitable things, what I have a big belief about here is that philanthropy is not just the province of Bill Gates or John Paul Getty. It's very easy to give your time. That's a philanthropic thing. You don't have to give money, and a lot of people cannot give money to charity, and that's understandable. Many who can do, but you can give of yourself and of your time, and that's why volunteering in the Scouts and supporting charities, supporting voluntary organisations, working on the governance, the management, the leadership of that is such an important thing, and more valued, I think, these days for young people coming out of university, working in the Students' Union, the Guild. I know that Graham's on this. Graham is a colleague of mine from the Stables Theatre in Milton Keynes, and Graham is a Liverpool University alumnus as well, and we were talking last night actually because he runs the international festival with me and the team there, and we depend entirely upon volunteers to run an international festival. So there's loads of things that I just think almost every human being can give, irrespective of whether they have money to give to charity, and that's my notion of philanthropy, giving of yourself.
Which is a wonderful answer. And for those people who don't know, my role at the university is Director of Development and Alumni Relations. So we oversee all of the volunteering. So if there are any alumni out there who wish to donate their time or their money, we would be very happy to hear from you. So thank you for that.
Which you didn't tell me to say that, I can assure you. We haven't rehearsed it.
Just pouncing on the opportunity.
Of course.
I'd love to talk a little bit about leadership. Obviously, you've led in many different ways throughout your life. Can you tell us what you think is the most challenging aspect of leadership, and how?
Yes.
Brilliant, go for it.
The key things are understanding the difference between responsibility and accountability. I've never read a management textbook really in my life, so this isn't a textbook answer, but it is a very clear answer based on my experience. Accountability is absolutely knowing that you are the one that's responsible. For example, Alison Rose, she had to go because she was the CEO. That's the price you pay. That's why people are paid lots of money in CEO roles. Accountability cannot be delegated, and when you take on that leadership role as the one and only number one, you have to pay the price for it, or you take the plaudits for it, and praise for it. Responsibility can be delegated, and it is, and it should be, and you can't lead an organization without great people to whom you delegate very clearly responsibilities for different aspects of your work, But if things go tits up at Liverpool University, the VC is responsible, and that's what is taken on. And I'm sure he knows that, and I'm sure Janet before him knew that, and there we go. The other key quality, and this is where, when you are the only one as a CEO, it's very important you have a chair who can help you with this. The other key quality is judgment. You have to get the big calls right. So again, if I can just use Alison Rose, whom I've never met in my life, incidentally. So, but the call there on Nigel Farage was actually made by the guy at Coutts, because of the group structure of NatWest. But actually, he should have told her, and they should have had the conversation and thought about the implications of it, in my view. And so that was probably a process thing that didn't happen in the way of the relationship. But if you have a good chair, before you take the big judgments, and knowing which are the judgments you have to take with somebody else and bear the accountability for, is part of the discernment that's needed. That's the word, discerning what is the big call. You don't have to bear that on your own if you've got a good chair. You can talk it through, and you should talk it through. And actually, the best time of my life as chair, up to date. I mean, I'm not to say I'm not chairing things now, and it's not great. I chair the Lloyds Bank Foundation, so I don't want Paul Streets, who's the CEO, to think there's any reference to him or chairing the festival, and Monica Ferguson there. But the Scouts was a brilliant example for me of that, because Matt Hyde is the CEO there. I was the chair. And Scouts, we had to risk assess so much all the time. It's a bloody risky job, and it's not even that well paid if you're the CEO. But actually, making the right calls to do with safeguarding, look at what happened with Korea, if you're following the Scouts, the World Scout movement, making those calls and judgments, that's the key thing in leadership. And a real test of good leaders. And most of them, look at the politicians, of all parties, they mostly get it wrong, don't they? Because they don't make the good calls. And that probably goes for business and education and the rest. That's my advice.
Have you got anything that sort of might surprise aspiring young leaders? I mean, there was so much there around what's challenging about leadership, but yeah, is there any other advice you'd offer to aspiring leaders?
Why to go into it? Good point. Well, if you're an elder, bossy child who likes to be in control, which is what my sister would say I am, then the prize is that you get to run your own show. So it's a good channel for all those people who don't want command and control, but generally do want to make a difference. And this is where I think the position of a leader, the power that you have as a leader, the ability to act and do and get things done, as you do have if you're a leader of your own business, if you're an entrepreneur as well. But leader of an institution, you can do so much. And I think that's what happened to me, because I was so young when I became principal of Milton Keynes College, and that college needed complete reformation, which is what it got. And I was in the position and had the power to do that. And that's good, as long as you bring people with you, of course. But I would say that's really gratifying when you see organizational transformation.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got lots of audience questions coming in, so I'm going
to. I can't see them, so you're going to have to.
Yeah, no, don't worry. Andy's on hand, so I'm going to have my very last question, then I'll turn it over to Andy to get through all the audience questions. But
right.
I think of all of the things we've talked about so far, is there anything that's an important part of your journey that we've not touched upon that you think it's kind of interesting or important for the audience to know?
I'll just pick up the one. You alluded to the fact that I was a Quaker. I think the word that's not come in the conversation so far is values. I'm completely driven by my values. It goes back to not just doing what you love and then you'll love what you do, but actually, if you do things that align with what matters to you in life and what your values are. So truth and integrity are very, very important to me. It's why being a Northerner is so fantastic, because what you see is what you get. Of course, I have told lies in my life. Everybody tells white lies, but on the whole, I am an honest and open and transparent person, and that's what Quakers are. So values and values underpinning my leadership were critical, and explaining to people what those values are is absolutely vital. So I think I just kind of mention that, and actually always try and use that to explain to people who don't necessarily share those values. You asked me earlier about how you deal with misogyny and homophobia, racism, whatever it is. I think that's where you then have to try and take people back to, well, what are your values set then? What's your framework for life? It doesn't have to be a religious value, but I'd much rather live in a kind and tolerant society than in a society that puts people down and is based on a lack of democracy. Because we only have to look at societies around the world, largely run by leaders who are men. Just a fact. Putin or Kim Il Jong and and Erdogan, and well, anyway, Modi. I don't mean to be. I'm saying this as a matter of fact, actually, but their good political leadership is good to choose because people know about that, even though it's politics. And you think, well, where are the values? Where is the frame of reference there, even in some other democracies?
Really important. Thank you very much. Andy, audience questions.
Thank you, Susie, and thank you, Damon, for answering those questions. It was absolutely fascinating to hear your journey, so thank you. And we are getting lots of really nice questions from the audience. I'll kick off with those now, if I may. And the first one asks, what has been the highlight of your career so far, and what has been the biggest challenge of your career so far?
The highlight was probably when I moved from further education to doing the job with Learn Direct, and then UK Online and well, what's now gov.uk, those big technological innovations, which I mean, some people would be tiny when those happened from 97, 25 years ago, in the Blair years. But being in and around Whitehall and Westminster, going back to the point about power and being able to do things, and with a Prime Minister in Blair who, didn't know how to use his mobile phone until he left office, but actually recognised that digital and technology was key to learning, and that it had to be for everybody, was really terrific. What did you say? Was that the opposite? What was the most terrible thing?
And what's the most challenging thing in your career so far?
Well, I'm glad he's saying so far, because I mean, at 70, I think I'm well past a career. The most challenging thing is actually dealing with the death of a student when I was a principal of an FE college, and indeed the death of a young man in the Scouts. Because well, it's just it's just a very difficult thing to deal with. Death is a very difficult thing for us all to deal with, but when a young person dies in both cases as a result of tragic accidents, it sits very heavily with you.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, but thank you for sharing that so candidly. My next question from Daniela leads kind of nicely on to a point you mentioned about politics, and they ask, have you ever wanted to get involved in politics, or did you try and stay away from it?
Well, the time I thought about it was when I joined the Labour club at Liverpool University, and I had a bit of a taste of student politics, and I realised then I would be utterly hopeless. And everything I have seen subsequently in my long life confirmed for me that I would be utterly hopeless, which is why I absolutely bask in the reflected glory of all those presidents of the NUS that I have helped, including my absolute hero of the moment, Wes Streeting, on whom I have a bet to become the first openly gay Prime Minister, but is currently Shadow Health Secretary. He's got it. That's what you need for politics. The kind of those sorts of abilities. There's not just him. There's a load of them, and there's probably some Liverpool alumni, and I don't know them. But I worked a lot with people who became president of the NUS, and I worked with the NUS. On their improvement board, the National Union of Students, much later on when I wasn't a student. And so student politics is a really great a ground for getting involved in what politics is all about. But I'd be hopeless at it because I haven't got the temperament and the skin and the craftiness and the stamina and the intellectual ability to do it. No.
That's fair enough. Thank you, Anne. Question from Jill, who says, I graduated in 1993 and have learned so much by volunteering and being introduced to all sorts of community initiatives. Joining the British Federation of Women Graduates at Liverpool was a great lift to me, quite different from my background too. Promoting philanthropy and encouraging women into public life is very rewarding, and how we can get more women in to pursue such endeavours is vital, so thank you. And she goes on to ask, do you think that being at Liverpool encouraged activity in public life when you were there?
If I'm honest, I'm not sure that it did, which sounds very damning of the university, but you do have to really think back to 71, 75, the early 70s. I think certain parts of the university did more, maybe the lawyers, and of course it depends what you put in yourself, doesn't it, as a student, how you do get involved. I didn't really have the confidence when I was 18, actually, to push myself forward very, very much, and therefore I maybe didn't take advantage of enough of what the university might have had to offer. But actually, my perception and memory is that there weren't, I think, as I said in answer to one of Susie's questions earlier on, the whole life of the student experience wasn't really so much focused on in those days in the 70s. I don't think your academic career and being taught by good people was a focus, and if you did everything that was anything else, that was just sort of entirely a lot of that was up to you. Whereas these days, I know from my involvement in different universities, and I've sat on the council of the Open University, and I'm involved at the University of Surrey now as a pro-chancellor, you have a lot of opportunities to get engaged and to build up that volunteering journey, just as Jill has said, and then that stays with you throughout your life. I think it wasn't on, but you're talking about a time when 5% of us went to university. It's ridiculous, really, wasn't it, that that university education was denied to so many, and now it's a much more universal experience for people.
Absolutely, thank you. The next question comes from Nick, who says, AI has recently become part of our conversation. Any thoughts you would like to share on how you think this technology might benefit society?
Good question. Well, I'm sure it's important, and it's not going away, is it? I don't know enough about it technically. I know at City and Guilds, because we do a lot of obviously assessment, but learning and assessment. There are we are seeing technologically that there's huge benefits to AI in many ways, which will actually make what we do a lot more accessible and more pervasive and available to many more people. But actually and if I was young now, I'd really get my head around it. I'd really want to try and understand it and use it and experiment with it, because it's a fascinating innovation of the spirit and the creativity and intellectually. So I hope we can get hold of it, but that's a very general answer, because I don't have enough. I mean, I've done ChatGPT. I put my own name in and a few other bits of things just to see what it would come back as. But that just gives you a very little soupçon, doesn't it? A little taste of what and how it could be applied in so many fields. And I think students now at Liverpool, in their various courses, surely it will be gradually being used and integrated even more. So you're going to leave as a graduate with more knowledge of that than many others.
Great, thank you. The next question comes from Vapav, who says, we all generally speak about leaders most of the time. What would you say about the quality of followers? Do you think that good leaders also require good followers?
Well, I think a good leader will help people to follow. I don't think even a good leader can make somebody follow if that person doesn't want to follow. And I'll give you a very specific example in terms of my own career. So I went age 34 to be principal of Milton Keynes College. which, as I say, needed quite a lot of transformation. And I had to, I mean, just to be very specific, I mean, you know, teachers were there, lecturers were there to teach students, you would think, wouldn't you? Oh, no, that wasn't what I found. Just even the first principle of getting people to put students at the centre of things and get them qualifications was where I basically had to start. But the point is, I started to try and change a college and to get it focused on its primary task and to improve it and get better resources and make it more creative and give more student support and stuff like that. And yet I had to absolutely do that with people who would follow me. And it was no good me just having people in that college who were reacting badly to all of that all the time, because obviously they didn't sit well in the culture. So I think as a leader, you've got to be open about what you're there to do and how you're going to do it. And you will find that some people don't like that, and therefore they won't follow you, and therefore they might leave. Or indeed, you might have to say to them, are you sure you're best suited to being in this place? Go and find a different type of organisation and culture. So I don't know whether there's anything such a thing as a good follower, but I think it's horses for courses, and people choose their cultures and they choose the type of organisation they want to work in. And increasingly, I see this with my niece and nephew that I have referred to already in the conversation today. You know, my niece's husband absolutely chose to leave a city law firm to go and work because of his own, they call him the eco warrior, because of his own eco principles, to go and work with Client Earth because he wanted a different culture, and he didn't want to earn all the money at Macfarlane's. He wanted to go and work for Client Earth. And I think it's really great that people make those choices to find places that are compatible with their own values.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. Thank you. The next question comes from Russell, who says, you said earlier that you've never read a management book in your life. So, and he goes on to say, so how have you learned to become the successful and transformational leader that you have become today?
I mean, that was a bit glib. I did get quite fond of a man called Tom Peters when I first, in my early 30s, found myself as a CEO, and I did go on a management course at Cranfield. But I'm not sure I ever finished a management book, as I think I probably got fed up and, you know, turned to the newspaper or a novel. But the serious answer to the question is this. I really think that the cycle of learn, practice, reflect, fail, and try again is a good way to develop what's right, whether it's a leader or a manager or learning a new skill. And I think that bit of failing and reflecting, I did a lot of things, and then I tested them out. I didn't necessarily have words for them. I might have done them instinctively, or I did them because it felt right in terms of tackling a problem. I didn't sort of take the idea off the shelf of or from the page of a management book and say, oh, I think that'll be the answer. I'll apply it and try it. Although I think that's a perfectly good way of dealing with things. I probably did it much more experimentally, and then reflected, and then worked it through, and then found a theory and a language and words that fitted what I'd actually been doing in practice.
That's great, thank you. We are coming towards the end of the event, yes. So thank you all so much for your questions. We've got time for one more from the audience, and then I may cheekily ask one myself at the end, if that's okay. The final audience question, it says, it's from Zan Elliott again, so thank you for your question. And they ask, which points of your career journey were the most important, in your opinion, on your way to CEO/chair levels?
The most critical point for me was aged 51 and a half, 52, when I consciously chose not to be a CEO, a number one and accountable, anymore. I'd had 3 jobs where I'd done that from quite an early age, at 34, as I say, Milton Keynes College, Cambridge Regional College, Department for Education. And I wanted to move into the non-executive world and the world of governance and ultimately being a chair. And I talked to various headhunters, and they said, are you absolutely sure you haven't got one CEO left in you? Because if you transition then into the non-exec world, it'll be harder to go back. And I thought that was very good advice, because the roles are very different. And the problem very often is that people can't leave the CEO behind. They take on a chair role or a trustee role or a non-exec role, and then they start telling the CEO what to do, and that's not what it's about. Certainly you have to challenge a CEO, and you have to support, and you have to share some of the collective responsibility as a board, but you don't have to do the job. So it really meant that I thought that through, and I definitely have never hankered back. I mean, I could have carried on for probably another 15 years and actually earned a lot of money as a CEO in different things. But I knew I didn't want to do that. And that was the decision I had to make, including, if you look at it this way, forfeiting earning the money. But I earned enough to live on, and that was all I was interested in.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you again for sharing that. That's really interesting. A final question from me, if I may, before we wrap up, is I just wondered if you had a particular highlight of your time at the University of Liverpool, or a favourite moment or something that really sticks out when the University of Liverpool was mentioned to you.
The best time for me was singing in the choral society that I mentioned early on. I think that it was completely extracurricular, really. I mean, I enjoyed my degree, and I got a good degree, and I said earlier on how important I thought it was that teaching and doing all your exams in the medium of French for a single honours French degree was really, looking back on it, quite a tall order. But and being taught in the language, that is a highlight, because I don't think you get it these days. I don't just mean at Liverpool, but I think the fact that there was a strong artistic, creative, musical tradition, which is in the city. I love the fact that we had the art. For me, it was going to the Walker Art Gallery, it was going to the Everyman Theatre, to the Liverpool Playhouse. Obviously, Liverpool City of Culture, and the whole change of Liverpool as a city that's happened during my lifetime is phenomenal, although it did take some doing. But I think the fact that you've got 3 universities, but Liverpool University, where creativity was valued, was really quite significant for me, and the fact that it was musical. And this Hermione Lee that I mentioned, who was a friend, who was an English lecturer at the time. She's a specialist in Virginia Woolf. She's a bit older than me, but the fact that the lecturers she was a young lecturer in the English department, was stood next to me singing in the choral society, and that we kind of got on. It sounds pathetic, really, but actually that sort of thing, that companionship, and that singing and that performing in the university, going to the Liverpool Phil, all of that were just wonderful experiences for me as a young person, and I've carried them with me all my life.
That's lovely to hear, and lovely that you've got such fond memories. Wow, that was absolutely fascinating. We've covered so much. We can't thank you enough, really, Damon, for giving up your time and sharing your experiences so open and honestly. So thank you so much for doing that for us. Thank you to everyone who's attended today's event as well. We really appreciate people attending. We've had a few people say that they've tuned in from the United States, where it's midday there, so it really is a global audience. And yeah, we hope you found it really interesting, because I was blown away by how interesting that was. So thank you, Damon. We really appreciate your time and support. And best of luck for your damehood as well. We hope you have a lovely day with your family as well. It's a real proud moment, so have a lovely time with that celebrating. Our next event we're hoping will be in December. We're hoping to reveal news about the speaker in due course, so please keep an eye on your emails and social media for that. But final thank you to you, Damon, for your time. We really appreciate it, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thanks very much. It's been great to talk to you. I'm glad it's worked as well.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks, Susie. Bye.